What's happening, Internet family? Tonight we're going to talk about one of the top conspiracies of all time. We're going to talk about JFK, and more specifically, the JFK assassination. JFK was president of the United States of America in 1963. He was a very beloved and popular president. He was also the youngest president in American history. And there were a lot of indications that deep state actors and the CIA, etc., did not like JFK. In fact, JFK had had many arguments with Allen Dulles, then lead of the CIA. Keep in mind, the CIA had recently been formed after the OSS, which was a department of the Navy, and including a bunch of Nazis through Operation Paperclip, another great conspiracy theory that you should definitely look into. So today I want to look at just the facts surrounding the JFK assassination, just what we can actually know from the documentary evidence, the primary evidence from that day in 1963. And the best evidence we have is this video. This is called the Zapruder film. And as you can see from the Zapruder film, he's already been shot in the neck here. And here, right about here, is the kill shot where he gets shot in the head. And you can see his head jerk back and to the left there. So here is an overview of Dealey Plaza, the plaza where they last minute changed the route of the motorcade for JFK, and where the Secret Service driver was driving very slow, and they hadn't properly vetted all the surrounding tall buildings to see if they were safe or not. So this 3D rendering shows the limo at frame 224 from the Zapruder film, which we just watched. There's a freeway sign, and over here is a grassy knoll and a picket fence behind the grassy knoll. That's going to become very important. And here is where Oswald was supposedly, the supposed killer Oswald was in the book depository there. But in the kill shot, which was right around here somewhere, right where the car is shown there, you can see that his head goes back and to the left, away from, as if the shot was coming from over here by the picket fence right here. And you can see his head go boom, back and to the left, which would be very odd if the shot came from here. I mean, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. If the shot comes from here and then his head goes back and to the left there, very odd, which of course is one of the reasons why there's so many conspiracy theories around JFK. Once again, here's the grassy knoll, here's a picket fence, and his head goes back and to the left in that frame. So very indicative that something is not right in the official narrative. And here's a shot of the book depository where supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald was. He was supposedly in this window right here, and he shot JFK somewhere down here, and that made his head go back and to the left this direction. Very odd, to say the least. And here's an aerial photo of Dealey Plaza back then in 1963 and what that looked like. And this route has actually been changed very recently by the Secret Service. And see, I think he was supposed to originally go a completely different route than this, and they changed it so that he would have to come to a very slow stop right here in this corner here in order to make that more than a 90-degree angle turn. And then for whatever reason, the Secret Service driver was driving very slowly down this lane, very slowly. And then once he got shot, the Secret Service driver sped up quite a bit. By the time he was going under the triple underpass down here, he was going quite a bit faster than when JFK got shot right in here. He was going very, very slowly indeed. Okay, now let's listen to one of the eyewitnesses who actually witnessed the assassination in person. Let's see what he has to say.
On November 22nd, Mr. Price.
Yes, sir.
Right here?
Right here on the spot.
And where did you think you heard the shots come from?
From behind the overpass over there, triple overpass. That's where I thought the shots was coming from.
And where did you see the man run?
Over behind that wooden fence, past the cars, and over behind the Texas Depository building.
Now, he's not the only eyewitness who claimed to have seen puffs of smoke and heard shots fired from that grassy knoll area. In fact, grassy knoll itself has become a meme for meaning things that actually happened that somebody got accused of that wasn't involved. or somebody trying to claim responsibility for something that happened, they'll say, oh, I was the man on the grassy knoll. When they're trying to claim responsibility for something that happened that they weren't actually involved with. The grassy knoll itself has become kind of a meme, so that's interesting. But let's go ahead and look at some more evidence here. Okay, so let's keep a running list here of who was guilty and who was not guilty. I think it's clear from the angle that the shot where it hit him in the head from the front right and rocked his head backwards to the left, that kill shot clearly couldn't have come from the book depository that was way behind him on the right, right? So let's go ahead and put in the not guilty category, Lee Oswald. Definitely, I don't think he was guilty. That's just looking at the documentary evidence. If you want to make the argument, we can talk about more on that later. In fact, let's go look at the rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald used to kill JFK. So here's the rifle that supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald used to murder JFK. The problem with this rifle is that it's bolt action. It takes quite a while to shoot and then chamber the next round and then shoot again and then chamber the next round and then shoot again. And supposedly there were only 3 bullets fired. The eyewitnesses on the ground there at the scene claim that there were many more than 3 bullets that they heard, many more than 3 shots fired that they heard. However, the official narrative is that he shot 3 shots from there. One of them hit him in the neck. One of them blew his head back into the left, even though the shot was coming from way back in the right somehow. And then the other one hit Governor Connolly in the arm, I believe, something. This is one of the reasons why conspiracy theorists often talk about the magic bullet theory. The magic bullet theory claiming that Lee Harvey Oswald could not possibly have shot as many shots as got off in that brief moment of time that's captured by the Zapruder film. So obviously there's been a ton of research into the JFK assassination, and one of the main researchers that's quoted a lot was Jim Garrison, a lawyer from, I believe he was from Louisiana, and he did a lot of research on the JFK assassination shortly after it occurred in the late 60s, early 70s. And what he overturned was that basically his trail ran cold at Meyer Lansky. So this here is Meyer Lansky right here. Meyer Lansky is a well-known Jewish mob boss. If you've seen the show Boardwalk Empire, you'll know Meyer Lansky very well. He was a character on that show. Meyer Lansky owned a host of businesses in the South, including in Dallas, and he's definitely been implicated as somebody who was arranging the assassination and hiring people, and also doing just a bunch of things tertiary to the JFK assassination out of Dallas and also out of, I believe, Louisiana. I don't remember the exact details. But anyway, Meyer Lansky was definitely connected by Jim Garrison and a lot of other people. And of course, one of the main people he was connected by, Jack Ruby, whose actual name was Jack Rubenstein. So he's another Jewish mobster similar to Meyer Lansky. And in fact, he worked for Meyer Lansky. There's a lot of evidence about Jack Ruby's involved. Jack Rubenstein, that's his real name, Rubenstein, in the JFK assassination, because, of course, we all know that Jack Ruby murdered in cold blood the alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. This is Jack Ruby actively shooting Lee Harvey Oswald and killing him. And it's interesting, too, that Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't being protected here. He was just being let out in the general public. And it's odd, too, like kind of the expression on this guy's face here is kind of odd, like as if he was expecting it to happen or waiting for it to occur or something. And here's Lee Harvey Oswald being shot in the belly by Jack Ruby. Here's Jack Ruby right here. Once again, Jack Rubenstein was his real name, not Jack Ruby. So I think we can put in our guilty, not guilty column. I believe we can add Jack Ruby over here. And we can also add Meyer Lansky to the guilty column, not the not guilty column. I apologize. I guess tabs don't work in this program. But Meyer Lansky and Jack Ruby, I think, definitely could be added to the guilty column there. So, of course, another question is, who else stands to benefit besides the Jewish gangsters for whatever reason that were definitely involved? We know Jack Ruby was involved. Well, Lyndon Johnson became president immediately upon the death of JFK. And if you don't know the history about Lyndon Johnson, it's actually really interesting. This guy was a career criminal who happened to be a major league politician and president for 1.5 terms, because he took over after JFK died and then was reelected for a whole nother term. Lyndon Johnson was one of the dirtiest politicians in American history, and in fact, he was posthumously convicted of several murders, not just one or two, but several murders that he was convicted of after he died, from before the time when he was vice president, from before the time that he was president, and from before the time that he was, I think he was a senator for Texas, something like that. So I definitely think we can add in the potentially guilty column LBJ. That's Lyndon Baines Johnson. That guy was very dirty, and he stood to benefit a lot from the murder of JFK, because then he became president, of course, for 6 years, 6.5 years, something like that. One of the other evidences against LBJ and the death of JFK was that he was sleeping with an Israeli spy the night before the JFK assassination. Now, that's never been confirmed, but there is a lot of evidence, a lot of eyewitness testimony placing him with a female Israeli spy the night before JFK died. And of course, Israel at the time was really, really desperately trying to get nuclear weapons. And JFK was putting a kibosh on that. JFK was basically saying, no, you cannot isolate uranium using a centrifuge in order to make weapons-grade uranium. Something Israel had been trying to do for quite a while and had failed to do, and in fact did get in trouble for stealing nuclear secrets from the USA not very long after that, including convicted spies and everything. So Israel did get the bomb while LBJ was president, and there's evidence to believe that LBJ had been sleeping with an Israeli spy. And of course, we also know Jack Rubenstein was Jewish mob and Meyer Lansky was Jewish mob. So there's a lot of implications behind Israel when it comes to the JFK assassination. So I guess on our guilty screen, we can go ahead and add Israel as a potential suspect. Clearly they were involved on some level, or at least implicated in a potential for having a motive for murdering JFK because they wanted nuclear weapons. Now we know that the President of the United States is actively protected by the Secret Service anytime he goes out in public. Even at the White House, he's continuously being protected by the Secret Service. So what happened on that day in Dallas with the Secret Service?
Everything seemed normal as the President's motorcade began its journey. Everything seemed normal. That is, up until this instant. What took place is so odd that we're going to examine the scene 4 more times.
So in that last shot, we saw what looked like a Secret Service agent being pulled off of the Kennedy detail and being like, what? He keeps raising his arms like, what's going on? Why am I being called off my position? So it seems like he was being called off his position by somebody shortly before the assassination. So clearly, to me, that implicates the Secret Service as a potential guilty party. Let's go ahead and add that to our list. Okay, so we got Secret Service, clearly implicated there. And remember, that's not the only evidence against the Secret Service. Also, the Secret Service driver was driving very slow after that turn, like intentionally slow. It's very odd if you watch the video. He seems to be driving very slow and then speeds up after he gets shot. And also, they had just recently changed the route in order to allow such a weird triangulation of potential target spots for shooters, including the grassy knoll, of course, which the eyewitnesses almost universally said they saw puffs of smoke, they heard shots. In fact, a lot of people in front of the grassy knoll hit the grass in front of the grassy knoll thinking they were going to get shot. Now remember, the CIA was also heavily implicated in the JFK assassination, and in fact, CIA Director Allen Dulles, that's him over here, right next to JFK, before JFK was murdered, obviously, had been fired by JFK. So definitely somebody with motive here is Allen Dulles. So let's go ahead and add to our potential guilty list CIA, and more specifically Allen Dulles, but basically the CIA, right? And who else would be in the CIA at that time? But of course, former president and former vice president George Bush Sr. He was very likely in the CIA at that time. And in fact, there's this image of him in front of the book depository on the fateful day in 1963 in Dallas. So it's very possible that George Bush Sr. was involved in some way. And in fact, almost everybody who was alive at that time remembers very clearly where they were when they heard JFK was shot. But George Bush Sr. said numerous times he did not remember where he was on the day that JFK was shot, which would be a big surprise as he was in the CIA and in Dallas at that time. Now, if you're interested in some of the other characters who were involved in the JFK assassination and who actually admitted to it on their deathbed, this is a picture of E. Howard Hunt, who was definitely involved in those circles at that time, and it basically admitted to the JFK assassination on his deathbed. And of course, he was also involved in the Watergate scandal involving Richard Nixon, etc. All major players in the Watergate scandal seem to be implicated in the JFK assassination as well. It seemed like that same crew that pulled both those heists did both of them one after another. So I guess in the potential guilty list, we can go ahead and put the Watergate crew. Most of the people involved in Watergate seem to have been in some way tertiarily involved in the JFK assassination. Now, when most crimes are investigated by police officers or somebody investigating any kind of murder especially, one thing that they clearly look at often is cui bono. That's Latin for who benefits. What's very interesting about this case is that George Bush Sr. seems to benefit inordinately from the JFK assassination. At the time, he's basically very young, just starting out in the CIA. Later, he becomes head of the CIA. Later, he becomes vice president under Ronald Reagan, but pretty much acting president. There's a lot of evidence that he was doing most of the shot calling as vice president underneath Reagan. Then he has his own presidency, which fails a little bit because he's very unpopular, probably because he's a scumbag, and it's just obvious by looking at his face that he's a scumbag. And then, of course, there's a lot of evidence that he was actually good friends with the Clintons, who took over the torch from him and continued to run drugs into the country for the CIA. A lot of evidence about that. Definitely suggest you look into the Mina connection and the Arkansides murders and all the different drugs that were being imported into Arkansas when Bill Clinton was governor there. Bill Clinton is friends with George Bush Sr., always was. And then, of course, after Bill Clinton, George W. Bush is president. His son ends up president. Now, his other sons are also involved in all kinds of serious scandals. Marvin Bush was in charge of security on 9/11 and had called off the bomb sniffing dogs months before. Also, I think Marvin Bush was the one involved in the SNL scandal, which robbed, hundreds of thousands of senior citizens of their retirement. George Bush Sr. in particular is really at the root of so many evil conspiracies and plots that the United States has been behind over the last 100 years. It's really kind of crazy. He was head of the CIA, he was vice president, he was president, and then his son, although technically unelected, served 2 terms as president, including presiding over 9/11, one of the other biggest conspiracies this country's ever had. So when you want to ask who murdered JFK, I think you've really got to take a good long look at Jewish mob, Israel, the CIA, and in particular, George Bush Sr. So where does that put us today? I don't really know. The reality is most of us who are alive now weren't alive in 1963 when JFK was murdered. There were so many suspicious deaths after the murder of JFK, so many eyewitnesses that ended up dead in strange circumstances. Supposedly his wife, Jackie Kennedy, who is a really odd-looking person, by the way. Just look at her. Look how odd she is. She's just a strange-looking individual. It comes from a lot of money as well, Jackie Onassis, and then married into fabulous money after JFK was murdered as well. So interesting character, that Jackie Kennedy. She did put some stuff in a vault that was supposed to be released 50 years after JFK died, and guess what? It still hasn't been released, and Trump had the option to release all of the JFK files, and he did not. He released a bunch of them and kept a bunch of them redacted and did not release a bunch of them. So for those of you who are into the QAnon psyop, once again, Trump's not telling us the truth on JFK. So he's not telling us the truth on JFK. He's not telling us the truth on Israel. He's not telling us the truth on 9/11. And, he worked on NBC for 10 years. It's really hard for me to believe or buy the narrative that Trump's some kind of good guy. I really don't buy it. I think it's wishful thinking of the highest order. It's very clear to me that the bad guys have been in power for a long time and are still in power. So what do you think happened to JFK? Do you think Lee Harvey Oswald by himself in the book depository shot him from an incredible distance and somehow also got off a bunch of other shots miraculously in a very short amount of time, including a headshot that made JFK's head go back and to the left, despite the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald was way back there on the right side? To me, the JFK is at the very foundation of everything that's wrong with this country. And you've got to look into it. I suggest you look into it yourself. Again, I wasn't there in 1963, obviously. I wasn't born until way later. But to me, it's very clear that somebody murdered JFK, and it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. Who was it? We may never know. But I have a good feeling that it had something to do with George Bush Sr. And of course, JFK Jr., before he died, I almost said murdered, but we don't know that. Before JFK Jr. died, he was also publishing a magazine called George, which George Bush Sr.'s first name is George. So was he implicating George Bush Sr. in the death of his father? I believe that's possible. Give me your thoughts, Internet fam. I'd love to hear what you think about the JFK assassination.